Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ask the Expert session on workflow and orchestration. This is a monthly series where we try and discuss an issue that a topic where we see customers struggling with and try to address some common problems that we see coming in to the support center and coming through on incidents. This month's topic is going to be workflow versions and moving workflows from instance to instance with update sets. So let's jump in and get started. First of all, if anyone has any questions, you can post them on the community page, and I'll be checking at the end of the session, looking for any questions come in. I'll try and answer them right away. And if not, if you don't get them in time, or if I can't answer them, we can continue the discussion over the next week or two on the page. So let's get started. I have an instance here that I spun up in our Prov Lab that we're going to be using for a demo. And let's just talk about a couple topics related to workflow versions. So first of all, I'd like to show this wiki page and talk about workflow versions and what they are. The workflows are a little bit different from the rest of the product in that they have a check-in and publish cycle that other parts of the product don't have. So whenever you make changes to a workflow, you can as long as it's checked out to you, you can make as many changes as you want. But once you click publish, that workflow version is locked, and that's the version that the system is going to use for all workflows that it starts up. And the purpose of that is to protect you from making changes to a workflow that's already in progress. So if you think about a workflow, it could run anywhere from a couple seconds to a couple months, right? Workflows live for a long time. So if I start a workflow and it's got some manual approval steps, and then I decide 2 days later, while that workflow is still running, waiting on somebody to make an approval, and I decide I want to make some changes to that workflow, if I just changed that workflow version, then it would most likely break things, or there's a good chance that it would break things. So instead, what you have to do, we have the checkout publish to protect that currently executing workflow. You check out a new version of the workflow. You make your changes there, you test, and then when you're ready to publish that version, you can publish it, but all the existing workflows that are already started will continue to run on their old version. And only new workflows that start will run on the new version. And so that's put in there to protect you, so make sure that you use it. We've had a couple situations where people have either found a way through the UI or done it through scripting where they've said, oh, I can change my workflow activity on the fly without having to check out and republish my workflow. And occasionally that works, but a lot of times it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, it can create some real messes. So use the publish and checkout mechanism. That's our first bit of advice. This document, sorry, I didn't introduce this document. This is on our wiki, and it just explains some basic concepts about workflow. I've got actually the link here, and I'll post them into the community page when I'm done with this talk. But I've got a couple links that I'm going to refer to. We just talked about workflow versions and the check-in, check-out process. That's kind of described in here. Let's take a quick look at it. If we look on my demo instance here, and when I go to the workflow versions link, I'm seeing right now that I have one workflow version for my flow called parent flow, and it's currently published. So now if I were to check this out, let's go into the workflow editor. I'll just do it this way. And I can see up here it's telling me it's published. If I open an activity definition, or an activity, it won't, these are all locked down. I can't change them. So for the most part, the publish, if you're editing the workflow through the editor and it's published, you should be protected from making changes that aren't safe. But people have found ways. They either write scripts or they go in through the UI and they create their own form to get around some of the form controls, and they've modified these activities on the fly, and it causes problems. When I check this out, It now shows it's checked out to me, and if it's checked out to somebody else, it'll show you who the user is. And now I can edit it. So all these are now editable. And if we take a look at the workflow versions table, I'll see two versions here. One that's published and one that's not published and it's checked out to me. I'm logged in as system administrator in this case. So that's kind of publish and check out. It's very simple. All you got to do is use it. The next thing I want to talk about is there are still some problems. When you go to publish, we try and find some issues that can get you into problems. A situation like where you have a subflow or you have input variables and you're moving these things through update sets, it's possible that you can get some of your workflow changes in one update set and some in another. And there's some other problems that come up with workflows, especially if you're doing things like modifying activities without doing it through the editor. You can put your workflows into a bad state and you can create a bad published version of a workflow. And it crashes when it executes and it causes problems. So what we did is we wrote these things called validators. And there's a little checkbox here that runs all the validators. And these things are basically just analyzing your workflow, and they're finding any known issues, stuff that we can examine the workflow metadata and say, this is not going to work. You've got a problem in here and you need to fix it. In this case, this is real simple. I have no problems in here. So I'm just seeing info level messages saying there are no unattached transitions, workflow and stages are valid. You get, a description of what it was checking for, and you get a level. If the level is info, then most likely there was no problems and you can publish. If the level is, there's two other levels, warning and critical. Warning means this looks fishy to us and you should probably take a look at it. Critical means we won't let you publish it. So you can, on a warning, you can override and hit publish anyway. And I think because I don't have any issues in this workflow, when I hit publish here, it's just going to publish it. But if I had any issues, and I'm going to demonstrate that later, it would pop up a dialog and warn me about it. But you can override it if all you have in there are warnings. So let's talk about these validators. There are 15 of them currently. And they're a little bit cryptic, the names. But like I said, if you have any messages, if you have any warning or critical, you'll get a message. It's kind of giving you a little bit of a clue about what they are. But if you want more information about it, there is a wiki page. That describes each one in detail. And this is a good example. This one we're actually going to talk about in just a second. So the wiki page, you can drill into each validator and it'll give you a description of what it's checking for. It'll explain what the potential problem is. And it gives you some helpful ideas for resolving the problem. And then in a lot of them, it'll also give you an example of how to create the problem. Some of them are not creatable. Some of them you can't do through the workflow editor. The editor just won't let you do it, but it is possible to do it outside of the editor. And so we have the validators in there to check for that situation, even though you can't create that situation. So that's that page, and that's another helpful page. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is, even though we have the check-in, check-out mechanism, we don't actually recommend that you check out a published workflow on your production system and edit it. We recommend that you follow a standard dev cycle. You can, do your development on development, do your testing on a testing instance, and put it into production on your production instance. Don't check out a production workflow on a production instance and make changes to it, because even if you think it's safe and you think that there's nothing wrong, you think it's a simple change, a couple things can happen. One, either if that's not your regular development cycle and you make that change on your production workflow, and then somebody else decides they're moving up a workflow from QA or from test, and they overwrite your change because they didn't know about it. It didn't exist down in their version. So your change got lost. The other problem that happens is, even though it seemed like a good idea and it seemed like a safe change to make, you don't really get to test it until it goes into production. And occasionally, that means that a change that worked fine when you tested it with just 1 or 2 workflow contexts suddenly blows up the instance when it's running in 1,000 workflow contexts. So it's best to do your testing, your development on dev, your testing on test, and your production on production. And I know a lot of people don't have 3 instances. They can't just spin up a new instance whenever they need it. But so if your dev and your QA are the same machine, that's fine. You just need to be a little more conscientious about the changes that you're making and how you're doing that cycle. So to move workflows between instances, how do I do that? That's the next area that we want to talk about. And we've got another wiki article here. Right, so this is an article that describes some best practices and techniques for moving workflows with update sets. And it's a great article. It's got a lot of detail, and it goes through a lot of problems that you can run into and how to get yourself out of them. The right way to solve that problem. And it's accurate and it works. The only problem with it is it's a little bit wordy and it's a little bit to go through. So I thought I would just run through and show you, as opposed to trying to read the text and have people understand it. So let's just do a couple examples here on our demo system. So I have an update set right now that I created called parent set. So I'm editing my parent flow and I'm editing it in my parent set update set. And if we look from my previous publish of this workflow, I have a workflow version. I actually have 2 workflow versions, and that's because I checked it out. But when you publish, so every time you publish a workflow, you're going to create 2 workflow versions, or 2 update records for that workflow version. One is going to be the unpublish of the previous version, and one is going to be the publish of the new version. So your update sets will always have, of an existing workflow, will always have 2 workflow versions in them. And you need both, because you need to pull out the old published version and you need to insert the new published version. So that's what this update is going to be marking. If we look at the XML in the update, it will say somewhere in here, published false, and the new one is an insert of a published true record. Okay, so when I hit publish is when the workflow moves into the update set. So until you publish it, it is not in the update set. So if you're just working, on a checked out workflow and you look in your customer updates, you're not going to see any workflow versions. It's not until you publish it that it moves it in there. And that workflow version contains everything you need to move this workflow. So let's take a look at this, guys. And that's kind of the simple use case of, I'm working on a workflow, I check it out, I publish it, it goes in my update set, I commit my update set to my production instance, everything worked, nice and simple. But you can run into some problems when you have subflows in an update set, or you have input variables in your workflow. And let's take a look at how that can happen. So I'm going to create a new, I'm going to create a new workflow here. Actually, sorry. What I want to do is, that worked great. So I created my parent workflow. It's in my parent update set. I like how that worked. And now I want to add another workflow. So I'm going to create a new workflow, a new update set, because I liked how simple that was. And I'm actually in this update set, or in this workflow, I'm going to create a child workflow for my other workflow. So this is kind of like a subset of information that I want to be able to reuse. And I know it's going to be a child workflow, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call this child set. And I'm going to make it my current set. So now I have a new update set that I can create my child workflow in. And I go to my workflow editor. And I'm going to create a flow called child flow. And I'm just going to throw a log message in here. So I miss that line. And finally, I'm going to publish it. And this publish is going to push my workflow version into my update set. And let's just go take a look at that real quick, verify it. Great, so there's my, now because this was a brand new workflow version, there's no previous version to unpublish, so I only see the one record. Great, so now I have two update sets, parent and child. They're nice and contained and componentized, and it's nice and simple. Problem is, and that works fine as long as my workflows are completely independent. And in this case, they are, because my parent flow is not using my child workflow yet. But let's make it do that, right? So I'm changing my parent flow. So if I go back to my parent set, and I go back into my editor, and I open my parent flow, and I check it out, and I say, oh, this do some work log message, that's been completely replaced now by my child flow. So I'm just going to call that and reuse that work. And that's my new workflow. Great, it looks good. I tested it. Everything's fine. I want to publish it. Okay, bam. Now I got my validation warning. And the problem here is that my child workflow exists in update set, child set. And my parent workflow exists in update set, parent set. So when I go to move those to a new instance, if I move parent flow by itself without moving up child set, this reference to the child flow will be invalid because the child workflow will not exist on the new system. And that's what the warning is telling us here. I'm actually going to, so this is the warning that you see when you try and publish. And it says that the workflow version contained warnings. There's 14 info messages, 1 warning message. You can override this and publish it, but I want to cancel it. And look at the validation report. Usually when you see that message, you should be canceling and checking the validation report. And if we look at this validator now, you'll see it's now up to warning level warn. And it says the workflow has dependent workflows that are in a different update set. So you know, it's kind of explaining the problem. And so we realize that that kind of simple update set management isn't working for this, right? When you're moving a workflow, you got to make sure that you move every part of the workflow in the same update set. If we go look at our update sets now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to override that, and I'm going to publish it. And you can see what the update sets look like. I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK on that warning message. And now, when I look at my parent update set, I still got my parent flow versions, but I have no reference whatsoever to my child flow. And this new published parent flow version expects child flow to be there. So if I push this update set to production, it's going to bomb. It's not going to run. And that's what the warning is telling you about. The resolution for this is real simple. You can do it a number of ways. One, I could go back to child set, and I could publish my parent flow into that. I could merge these two update sets together. You know, there's a number of ways to do it. The point of it is you've got to get both those workflow versions into one update set, or you have to know that they're in separate update sets and move and commit them both at the same time. It's up to you how you want to manage that. Now the same, if we look at, that's kind of explaining the subflow dependency use case. We've got a lot of good, so what I just demonstrated is basically what all this text is talking about. And it's just a little bit, you know, difficult to follow when you're reading the text unless you're actually seeing it. It's a little bit easier to see it on screen. The same sort of situation can exist with input variables. Workflow input variables are an extension of a platform variable mechanism. And so they don't have the check-in and check-out mechanism on them because we're just reusing that functionality. So when you publish a workflow version, the published version does contain every input variable that that workflow has as it existed at the time of publish. But there's nothing to stop you from going in and changing those variables through the regular system UI. And putting those would go into a new update set every time you make a change to those. And if that update set gets moved, you can have the same situation where I created my update set, I tested my workflow, I published it, I closed my update set, I committed my update set on prod, everything is hunky-dory and fine and dandy. And then I'm back on dev, I'm doing some other work, and I changed one of those input variables of my published production workflow. And I didn't realize it. It ended up in an update set, and then when that update set gets committed to production, it will modify the functioning workflow variables on that workflow. And so that can cause a lot of problems. We're actually doing something about that in Fuji. Actually, a lot of the publish and versioning management and workflow is going to be changing starting in Fuji, the Fuji release, but it's going to be a while before you guys see that release. So in the meantime, you got to know how to manage this stuff. So if you're going to make changes to your input variables, it's just like child or subflows. You basically want to make sure anytime I change those input variables, I'm publishing my workflow into that same update set. As long as you're adding input variables, you're probably safe, right? Because the old ones will still be there. The workflow's not, the published version of the workflow isn't going to know to use them, and so it'll just keep chugging along on the old variables with no problems. If you're removing input variables or if you're modifying input variables, you can have problems, and that's what this section of the document is talking about. This last little section is talking about duplicate workflows. And this will be our final little warning. And this is just about update set management, really. If we have, if I'm modifying this workflow and I've published and I have some update sets, and then I create a new update set. Let's call it parent set 2. Make that one current. And I'm going to go back into my workflow editor and I'm going to check it out again. And I'm going to add something else to it. Oops. I'm just going to ignore the warning for now. Because the point here is I've now got 2 update sets. Both have a workflow version of the same workflow called parent flow. And in this case, they're named pretty obviously, right? parent set 2 you would expect to be the latest and greatest version of the parent flow. But not all update sets are named that logically, and occasionally people can get confused. So I might update, I might commit and move parent set 2 up to my production instance. And then at a later date, some other admin, or I just forget what my naming convention is, or I just plain get confused, I accidentally commit and move parent set. That will overwrite the existing workflow version and effectively roll back your workflow to the previous version. So that's just one danger that can happen. There's no warning about it. It's pretty rare. As long as most people keep their update sets named with a convention that makes it obvious which one is the latest. But just be aware that that can happen, and you just have to manage your update sets in a way that it doesn't. So that gets us through that document. I guess that was all of them. There is one other that I'd like to point out on our knowledge base. If you go to on high, if you go into the knowledge base and you look in the automation solutions section, there's a document here called Overview Workflow Versioning. And it has a lot of the same information. It also has some details. It came out of a K14 lab. And it's kind of a more in-depth dive into some of the stuff that's in the wiki documents. If you want more information, there's some good stuff in there. So just wanted to point that out. And that takes us to about 1:30. Let me check the wiki here and see. Doesn't look like we have any questions. And we're about at the end of our time. So I guess that'll be it for this month. Like I said, if you have any questions about the topic or any workflow orchestration topic, you can post it on this page. We're going to be having one of these sessions every month. Next month's topic is service catalog, using workflows to fulfill service catalog items and deliver service catalog items, and some problems that we see in there. So I encourage you to post your questions, and I hope to hear from you. Thanks a lot. Oh, wait, sorry. I was just told to refresh my page, and that might be the problem. I do have. So I do have a question here. Is having multiple end activities really a problem? Having a multiple end activities is not really a problem. It's okay as long as they're all valid. It can result in, it confuses some people, because once you hit that end activity, you could have some branches or some activities that end up getting canceled or don't execute. And so I think the warning in that case is more to cut down on customer confusion. It doesn't really cause the workflow engine problems. And I will type that answer up and post it in here. Apparently I'm not logged in just yet, but I will respond to that in text as well. And that looks like that was it. Okay, so like I said, let's keep the discussion going, and I hope to see some people next month. Thanks.